Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is part 2 of my 32nd birthday special. And what I'm going to do is a 15th anniversary special to when I started making Wheel of Fortune illustrations. But before I do that, here is a photo of a spinner that I made back in 2006. I was intending to use this as a Spanish class. Now, I didn't think I was going to speak any foreign language so well. So what I thought I'd do to try and just help make Spanish class a little bit more fun and a little bit more, a little bit more fun was to make a spinner that I intended to use as review. My concept would have been the review being involving the category being a Spanish phrase, and we were going to translate it to English. Now, ultimately, the spinner never served its intended purpose, but it led to something even more. As I was making it, I decided to use some geometry that I learned when I was in 8th grade, and this was about 3 years earlier. So, with that in mind, I knew that a circle was 360 degrees, and I knew it was divisible by 15. So as I was making it, I noticed that, hey, 24 wedges? So I used a calculator just to be sure. I divided 360 by 15, and sure enough, I got 24, which was the number of wedges that the wheel used on Wheel of Fortune uses. So like I said, it really led to something even bigger. So fast forward to 2007, I decided to start making some illustrations. This is the first template that I used, and I made this back in February of 2007. I used PowerPoint. I remember saving it as a bitmap. Even so, it could have been a little bit better. If you look at this wedge, right here, this one, you can see it's, if you look very closely, you can tell it's pretty narrow. But despite that, I used this for well over a year after I made it. So, but this was the first illustration that I made using this template. So I used some programs. I remember I used either, to color in the wedges, I used 2 programs at the time. One of them was MS Paint, the other was ArcSoft Photo Impression 5. And then to put in the numbers, I used either Microsoft PowerPoint 2003 or Microsoft Picture Publishing 2001. In this case, I used Picture Publishing. And I'll tell you, using both programs had its flaws. For example, in PowerPoint 2003, when you nudged letters and numbers around and whatnot, they would jump a few pixels at a time. They wouldn't move like pixel by pixel. So trying to get them into that perfect position was very, very difficult. As for Microsoft Picture Publishing 2001, I wanted the text to be vertical. While it was vertical, you could see a huge gap between each of the numbers. So really, for only some of the spaces like this bank, for example, I had to put them in letter by letter. I had to rotate it, and it was very cumbersome to do. It wasn't something. It was just very cumbersome. So as a result, I was only able to trickle out a few illustrations for the first few months. Now this one is based off of the Pressman box art layout, with a few differences. For example, on the actual box art layout, there was a prize wedge marked pin, so I decided to rename that to free spin for the sake of this layout. In addition, where this $450 space is, there was actually a space worth only $30. It was very odd to have that in there. So what I decided to do, just for my first illustration, I said, no, let's do this, let's do that, just for the heck of it. This was also The numbers were also put in using Microsoft Picture Publishing 2001. This was based off of the rug layout, but the reason why they're in this font was because I actually got this from these old crossword companion things that were on back, that were pretty rampant back in the 90s. They were very popular, and Wheel of Fortune also made these crossword companions popular. And I decided to get the wheel layout used in here, and I made a layout. I made some layouts based off of that. Again, it was very cumbersome. Trying to put in each number was very difficult, but I decided to have some fun with it, like I said. So here's what I did. I added a $1,000 space here, so made it kind of a round 1 sort of layout. For round 2, I increased some values, made this space 2,500. Round number 3, did some more. Here's $3,500. Round 4, you can easily notice the $5,000 space here. I remember that took me a lot of work. Same story for this as well. I also used, I don't know, I may have used PowerPoint. I think I used Picture Publishing for this one, but this took me a while just to do, I remember. This I made in PowerPoint. It was my first attempt at recreating the show's intro that was used from late 1992 to early 1994. And then here was a recreation of the wheel used on the Nintendo Entertainment System adaptation of Wheel of Fortune. Here's a recreation of the Genesis layout. That was actually the game that got, this was actually the game that got me into the Sonic the Hedgehog series back in 2001. Here's a recreation of the deluxe version. I know the colors are way off, but I just said, oh, I'm going to do it my way. It was just an idea of what to expect. Here's the Game Boy version. And this was made in PowerPoint. This was the puzzle board border. I made it myself in PowerPoint. And I did a whole bunch of stuff with it. Here's greases. I know now that there was supposed to be a space between this O character and the T. And I used symbol. The symbol font, and I know some of the letters that I have kind of their own name. I just don't know offhand. I know this is Sigma. You know, I do know a few others, and not every single one. But that's what I did. But like I said, I thought this was all one word. But there is a space in between. So, but that's what I did there. I made that back in 07. Here's the German puzzle board. Here's Australia. And another one that I used, and here's another wheel illustration that I did on Microsoft Picture Publishing 2001. This is the round 1 layout that was used on the show back in January 6, 1975. And I got this layout from the True Hollywood Story documentary that aired back in January of 2005, 30 years to the month, pardon me, that Wheel of Fortune premiered on NBC. And then I made the scoreboards. I also made some scoreboards and contestant backdrops. This is one of them that was used back in the late 70s. Now, in September of 2007, I made, I took a class, my senior year of high school. I took a class where I was introduced to Microsoft Publisher. So as I was working on an assignment using Publisher, I decided to toy around with the word art, and I thought, hey, this could be really good. and I used the word art feature, and I did the vertical text, I did the nudging, it went pixel by pixel. I said, perfect, this would be a perfect program for me to use. This would be a perfect program for me to use when putting the numbers and letters in on my illustrations. So I've been using Publisher ever since to put in the numbers and letters. This was a recreation of the Wheel 2000, a layout used by Wheel 2000. This wasn't the actual show's layout, but this was a layout that was used when the show went around the country and looking for people to have a chance to play and experience what it's like to be on the actual Wheel 2000 show. It was sponsored by the now defunct Bravo credit card company. And I was there when it came to Chicago's Navy Pier on November 1st, 1997. So that's how I know about this layout, and that's why you guys know about this layout. So, now this event was for kids ages 8 through 14. I was 7 years old at the time, so I couldn't participate. But they were nice enough to let me spin the wheel but only once. But it was a pretty good spin. I landed on the 1,000 point space. Here, so fast forward back to 10 years later, 2007. This was a recreation of the layout used on Stern Pinball's adaptation of Wheel of Fortune. Remember, I got to play the pinball machine a few times before the arcade that had it got rid of it. Now, not every Wheel of Fortune illustration that I made is one that I'm proud of. For example, this is a recreation of this was my first attempt at a recreation of France's layout used in the intro back in 1995. And I'll admit it could have been better. I didn't have the font to make the numbers like I do now. I was able to rotate them properly, put them into place, but it could have been better. There was a free spin symbol that was supposed to be here. I didn't put that in there. The lose a turn space and the bankrupt space, I used Times New Roman. The fonts were way off. And in addition, there's supposed to be a U between the O and T at the bottom part of the bankrupt wedge. So this could have been, I'll admit, could have been better. But at the same time, in 2007, when but around not long after I started my senior year in 2007, I made a illustration of the Big Money Wedge. This was actually the day I actually started work on this right after Wheel of Fortune started its 25th season in syndication, and this was September of 07. And what I did was I made an illustration, I made some slides, and then the very next day I went into school and where I had a graphic design class, and I put the illustration, I did the rectangles, and I saved it as a simple flash animation. So this is all the outcomes. So outcomes when the wheel is spun. The wedge, which was only seen in round 3 during the show's 25th season, would be activated, and it would shuffle between one of 5 outcomes. Bankrupt and lose a turn are one of them. The other 3 are cash prizes of $5,000, $7,500, and $25,000. And I knew about this wedge even before the 25th season began. I read about it on Wheel's site. And I was like, wow, this is going to be really cool. I wonder what it's going to look like. So the day it premiered, right after it premiered, I got everything. And made an illustration at my school. And I remember my graphic design teacher, she knew me since my junior year, and she was very, very impressed. So this is, while it is outdated, the bankrupt wasn't styled like the way it is here. And the 900 should have been pink. I always thought for some reason it was peach for some reason. But I eventually learned otherwise. But I soon learned otherwise. So. Here's some more illustrations that I did. This is actually a wheel that someone made for me back in 2001. I was really excited about this. But the original layout has since been damaged. It's been water damaged. But I created some custom skins for it. This was one of the skins that I made back in 2007. I called it the Super Wheel of Fortune illustration, and I made it. Here's what I did. I made a computerized illustration for it. Now, 2008 was a very interesting year. The first half of it, particularly late February until early June of 2008, it was the second half of my senior year. It was one of the best times of my life, and I remember graduating from high school on just a spectacular note. This is one of the earliest the illustrations that I made early that year. It was from the PBS Pioneers of Television special about game shows. So I made the illustration used based off of that. This was my first attempt at the layout used on the very rare Wheel of Fortune live play. And I would later learn that some aspects of the layout were wrong. But this was my first attempt, I remember. This was a recreation of a 2002 layout used on, of all things, in a cheesecake from Eli's. In April of 2002, I went to Navy Pier with my brother and my aunt, and we got to see 3 live episodes of Wheel of Fortune as live audience members, and the episodes aired the following month. But at the end of the second episode that I saw 3 episodes. At the end of the second of these third episodes, they brought out a cheesecake from Eli's. It was 517 pounds. That's a lot of cheesecake right there. And it had a wheel layout, and it wasn't until 2008 that I made this layout. And then here's a recreation of the layout used during season 12, late 94, early 95. And this one I called Wheel of Prizes, and just a whole bunch of elements. Some of these tokens have been turned into wedges. Here's the $10,000 space. This was made shortly after I heard about Wheel offering $1 million in the bonus round. Right before then, Australia had a short-lived revival of their version of Wheel of Fortune called $1 Million Wheel of Fortune. Although I loved it, not everyone agreed with me. Some people said that the show offering $1 million was not fit. It was not fit for a show like Wheel of Fortune. Here's Turkey's layout that was used back in the mid-late 2000s. And here's a much more improved version of the season 10 and 11 intro that was used from late 92 to early 94. I do plan on making even more of an improvement of this eventually. Here's a layout used on the final episode of the original version of Portugal's version of Wheel of Fortune, A Roda da Sorte. I remember seeing a video, and I got the wheel layouts. A lot of the stuff was pretty fun. I remember making the Joker space. I made the center. I even made pegs. This was a lot of fun to make. It was a lot of hard work, but it was a lot of fun as well. Here is Denmark's version. I put this up over to Wikipedia, and it's very popular in Denmark. This was the first layout used when the show premiered in Denmark in 1988. So I made that, put it on Wikipedia. And then Thanksgiving 2008, I made what's called the Turkey of Fortune. Here's the Season 12 puzzle board used. Now, later on I realized that I added a couple extra columns. I shouldn't have put this many triathlons seen here. Now, 2009 was not a good year for me. It was one of the worst years of my life. The worst of the worst was 2005 for me. But 2009 was just a really bad year. If 2005 was the worst year of my life, 2009 was the second worst. A lot of stuff went wrong for me that year. But I did make a whole bunch of illustrations that year. This is the layout used on Kurdistan's version of Wheel of Fortune. I saw a video of it back in late 2008, and I was able to make an illustration off of that. And I experimented with a lot of ideas in 2009. For example, I did a patriotic version. I did a cool colors version, with icy spring-like colors. Blue, purple, pink, really nice. Here's the layout used on the British version of Wheel of Fortune back in 2001. Note the 500 gamble space, and notice that Lose a Turn is named Miss a Turn. Similar to how the NES version of Wheel of Fortune called it the NES version and the Game Boy version. Here are some layouts used in Italy back in 1995. Here's the layout used on the Nintendo 64 version of Wheel of Fortune. Not exactly, actually. This was the layout used in an instruction booklet. So a few things here. 500 and 200 swapped colors. And you have a 000 space. This is the layout used on the French-Canadian home adaptation of Wheel of Fortune. I got a board game adaptation of it that year, and I went right on to making the wheel layout. Here's another crazy concept, Wheel of Time. I know that's pretty interesting there. And Son of Fortune, where instead of playing for cash or time like you did here, you played for, of all things, heat. Whew! Goodness. That's a lot right there, isn't it? Here's another layout with pegs. Here's the Vietnamese version that was used back in the mid-late 2000s. I'll tell you what I know what most of these means. This is a double. This is bankrupt. This is lose a turn. This one is your score is cut in half. I can't remember exactly what this one means, though. I'll probably put that in the description. Here's a much better attempt at me making the round 1 layout used on January 6, 1975. This was light blue for a reason. I thought, oh, they made it light blue for the time being, when in fact it was green. But early on, as well as but in the pilots as well as early on in the early run, the center was green, and they would change colors throughout it. Here is the first of my trademark Wheel of Stuffness series. Here's my second. These were really something. It's just basically just a whole bunch of crazy, funny, and zany ideas. Another layout that I had was wheel with words instead of numbers. Here's a here's a proper recreation of the layout used on Pressman's box art back in the mid-'80s. Here's the bonus round podium used on the show from 1992 to around 1996 or so, 97. Here's the layout used in a photo used for photos, press photos back in the late 80s. Very interesting, considering that there's a yellow bankrupt here, and not far from it is a $775 space. And Wheel of Misplacements. I remember seeing a lot of accidental placements of certain spaces, so I decided to make a layout with some of the misplacements that I knew at the time. And here's one of my first really big attempts at making a Sonic the Hedgehog version of Wheel of Fortune. This is called Ring of Fortune. Here's a wheel layout of bankrupts from around the world. And so, yeah, I did a lot of very interesting layouts back then. So for part 3, I'm going to show you on even more of my illustrations. That'll be up in just a moment.